Okay.
So I thought I could start by sort of explaining what bikekitz is, just to give you a little context. So it's a website that my partner Jen Barden and I started to sort of focus on the community and culture of women's cycling, because we feel like a lot of a lot of the cycling media sort of focuses on elite riders, racers, men. And we really wanted to be a voice for just regular women who love to ride, who are really avid cyclists, really active, maybe aren't necessarily elite athletes or following any kind of structured training plan, but we buy the stuff, we do the activity, we deserve to have a voice in the conversation. Yeah. So that's what we are.
Yeah.
Cool. So and a lot of our audience, not all of our audience, but a lot of our audience are kind of my age, sort of in the perimenopausal, menopausal time of life. So because the topic that you cover is so big, I'd like to focus on that aspect. Okay. And maybe also include some links for our younger audiences so that they can find information too. And of course, I'll include a link to the book for.
Okay, cool.
So maybe you could start by sort of just introducing who you are so that our audience.
People know who I am. Yeah. So I am Dr. Stacy Sims, and I'm an environmental exercise physiologist, nutrition scientist that specializes in sex differences. And I think the best elevator pitch that I can say for that is I look at exercise and nutrition to support adaptations. And those adaptations are different in men and women, and they're also different across the women's lifespan. So when I'm doing research and trying to look at other people's research, I look and see how it is applicable to women and how it's applicable to our, pre-puberty, post-puberty, premenopause, perimenopause, postmenopause, and really try to get to what is going on so that we can maximize our time when we're training without hitting a wall, because there's so many women that are like, I'm doing this, it's not working. I don't have that much time. I have a job, I have kids, I have a husband or a life partner. And when I have that 1 hour to myself, I want to make sure that it's the best hour that I can have.
Right, absolutely. Something that you have talked a lot about is why it's important to study women separately. One of the things that I think people, when they come across information like this is, it's sort of a little bit overload. Like I see so many things in the media. I don't know what to believe. There's already been all this research. So why is it important to study women separately from men?
So we really have to look at it in a historical context before we get into the now. So you have to understand that women have been marginalized so much through society, early days until, like, it was just as recent as the 60s with marathoning, women still weren't that well renowned or even included in just common sports. So not only we've been marginalized throughout society, but in research, it's even tighter for the marginalization, because research money is tight. Most of the time it's been a patriarchal model where it's been male physicians, male PhDs, male scientists, all trying to find a mechanistic aspect or really just understanding what's going on. And so when you're looking at a research model, they want to be short and tight. When you add women into that, because we have a menstrual cycle, because we have estrogen and progesterone that affect every system of the body, and then we don't as we get into peri and postmenopause, it doesn't fit into that tight patriarchal model. So most of the stuff that we know in biomedical research, sports science, pretty much everything really, except for the socio-cultural context, has been done on men and generalized to women. And as it's become easier to study women because we become more I don't want to say one-on-one with men, but it's become easier to access female population and the science behind women, and just the reduction of the marginalization. Really digging in, knowing that women are not small men. I mean, that's the tagline, because we're not. We are not a small model of men. We have sex differences from birth. Like even the amount of estrogen or testosterone that a uterus or a baby in utero is exposed to affects cognition and mood, and even if a baby might be miscarried or not, because there's a really good literature to show that a higher estrogen exposure and the epigenetic changes that happen to a fetus with the exposure to estrogen provided a greater ability to withstand stress. So most of the miscarriages that occurred due to in hospital environment or some kind of stress end up being those babies or fetuses that are exposed to testosterone, who would be male. So all these epigenetic changes start happening in utero, and when you bring it out into the real world context, I mean, even going to a shop, you'll see, male sections, female sections, all the external touch points are quantified by gender or sex, but the internal is something that really needs to be worked on. So that's the big push now across the board in all medical, biomedical, sports science, all sorts of research.
And you mentioned that it's a little bit easier to access the female population now. What are some of the things that have played into why that is so?
Just the globalization of society, really. Like, you're no longer siloed into one particular group. So if you put out a call for or a research proposal, it can be answered anywhere. Research funding, plus more and more women are interested in knowing about themselves and knowing about their peer groups, are willing to help. When I started research, a few decades ago, you'd be hard pressed to find a woman who'd be like, I'll do a muscle biopsy. I'm definitely not one that would do a muscle biopsy. And now people are like, sure, no worries. I want to know what's going on. So yeah.
Interesting. So let's do a little overview of what perimenopause and menopause is. I mean, probably a lot of my audience knows that already, but just so that we have a starting point that everybody's sort of familiar with. So what does it mean when a woman starts to go through perimenopause?
So when we're talking about perimenopause, this is when estrogen and progesterone start to perturbate a bit more, because when we're premenopausal, we need these hormones to fluctuate from a low to high hormone state, because that's the responsibility of the reproductive state. When we become older and our bodies aren't able to reproduce, then you start having a perturbation of these hormones as they start to flatline and plateau off. And the perimenopause state is this perturbation of hormones. And it starts, in your late 30s, where women are like, wait, I'm training and I'm eating just the way I did even 2 years ago, and it's not working for me. What's going on? And it's these subtle changes that are starting to happen. And if you go get blood tests, you might not see it. It might not come out until you start doing ratios and looking at the ratio change of estrogen, progesterone versus some of the other like luteinizing hormone and FSH, follicular stimulating hormone. And then you'll start to see they're flatlining a bit. And then when you get to the actual menopause, this is where both estrogen and progesterone have flatline. FSH is really high. So if you're trying to figure out, am I in perimenopause, or is it high stress that's causing this period perturbation, you get your follicular stimulating hormone tested, and it's really high, because your body's like, wait, I'm not ovulating. But then the FSH is like, wait, let's try to get this ovulation going, because estrogen's low. So if we ovulate, then it'll be a natural way to elevate estrogen. And that's the feelings that you have during perimenopause, is all this up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. But when the hormones drop and plateau off, then our physiology, again, has completely changed, because they are so systemic in their activation. Things like estrogen affects serotonin receptor sites. It also affects our ability to build lean mass by stimulating satellite cells in our muscle cells. Progesterone is part of the whole bone building process. Most people think about estrogen as being critical for bone building, but progesterone also is. It's also critical for insulin growth factor and our insulin sensitivity. So when those hormones drop off, you don't have a counter to these things. So this is why menopausal women, and towards the end of perimenopause, you start putting on more abdominal adiposity. You're more sensitive to carbohydrate. You might become pre-diabetic or diabetic. bone mineral density drops off. It's really hard to lean up. It's really hard to recover, because all of these are primarily not controllable from a hormone stimulation, because you don't have those hormones anymore.
Okay. Yeah, and those are all things that I can personally attest to. Yeah, and it doesn't, it's it just happens. It's not like you change what you're doing. It's there.
Just happens.
It just happens.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of a process of relearning how to do all the things that you are used to doing, and finding a way to make things work again, which
and this is where exercise and nutrition are so powerful. I'm like notorious for saying don't do intermittent fasting, and people counter me like, but there's so much longitudinal data that shows longevity is supported by intermittent fasting. I was like, but there's no exercise layered on top of it, because exercise across the board, when you look at all the longitudinal data on exercise, it promotes longevity. Why? Because it's a stress to the body. If we respond to that stress and overcome it, we get stronger. So when you start to get into peri and postmenopause, you have to change that stress. You still use exercise and nutrition, but you're changing the stress so your body responds to it in a positive manner. Which is why now there's a hashtag going around, lift heavy shit, because I said that in a talk last week, right?
I love that one.
Menopause, you get to menopause, and the recommendations out there are, you want to do lots of aerobic walking to burn off body fat. You don't want to do intensity because you don't want to hurt your ligaments and your tendons. If you're used to doing it, then you want to up it. If you aren't used to lifting heavy shit and doing intensity, you want to ease yourself into it, just like any other training program. But those are the stresses that a menopausal body responds to really well, because we don't have that stimulus from lean mass. We have to use exercise and good protein intake in order to stimulate lean mass and the satellite cells. So
yeah, that was a lot. It was like my whole list here of things that I want to cover all in. So so let me go back, and so let's sort of start by talking about health versus fitness, because they're really not the same thing, right? I mean, you might have somebody who is active but not really training, and really they just want to stay healthy for as they age, versus somebody who really wants to maintain the fitness that they had as a younger athlete, maybe even continue training. So they're like two different things. So how do you so let's start with health. Like if that's your focus, if you really just want to maintain your health, what are the things that is it different? Is it
So there is a defining line. So we always say that you have to be healthy in order to be a good athlete. So health should be the bottom parameter for everyone. I'm not saying bottom as in the most smallest minuscule part that you're looking after, but your base, right? You really need to have a really good foundation, and then you can build on it. So when we're talking about the health focus, what are the primary things that people are looking for? Preventing cardiovascular disease, preventing diabetes, getting prevention of overt increase in body fat, being strong, being lean,
good bones.
Yeah, good bones, all of these things. So when you're thinking about the training aspect, it does still apply where you need to change up what you're doing. And it doesn't mean like 7 days a week you're going and you're hammering yourself, you're looking for help. But instead of going and doing an hour jog, think about doing some intervals in that hour and then coming back and doing some body weight resistance stuff, because that's more powerful for achieving your health goals than it is to go out for that 1 hour long slow distance run. And I've gotten some pushback on that, because some people are like, well, the long slow distance stuff is my mental release. So I'm not saying stop it if that's what your mind and your calming aspect really needs, but also don't do it every day.
Right.
More people get in the habit.
Yeah, that's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, because I've read that advice. But I love these long gravel events that I do. I love to go out for a long ride, and I'm finding it really hard to sort of recover from those rides, and then yeah, just balancing all of that. I don't even know how to say what I'm trying to say.
Balancing the other things you're supposed to be doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, what I really want to do is just go out for a bike ride, but and that's not to say that I don't also lift weights and stuff, but it's easier just to get on the bike than it is to, say, do a plyometric workout.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it can be like some of the newer research that's coming out is just, 10 minutes of counter movement jumping, or jumping in different planes. So you're jumping off a box, off a stair, doing jumping lunges or jumping squats, 10 minutes, 3 times a week.
10 minutes 3 times a week will have a benefit. That's not
It'll have
much.
a massive benefit. No, for your bones. You could use it as a warm up.
Yeah.
So it's like and so this brings us to the training aspect, right? So if you're training for a specific race, you have your training program. So now you want to look, where can I incorporate some of this stuff that's good for promoting lean mass development and bone and all of those aspects of health within the confines of a training program. So it's not putting the focus on the high intensity. It's not putting the focus on the weight room. It's, okay, I'm going to train for this 90-mile gravel race. You need to have strength for it. So instead of doing big gear strength work on the bike, you can go into the gym and do some heavy lifting, and then get on one of the spin bikes to take that fatigue from the squats and the deadlifts and stuff you're doing and put into your pedal stroke.
Oh, okay.
So
then you're saying back to back the workouts?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So it's like you spend 40 minutes or 30 minutes lifting heavy, and then you can do a 20 to 30 minute spin, maybe some spin ups in it, to take some of the fatigue and the muscle patterning from what you've done in the gym and transfer it to the bike.
Almost like a superset.
Yeah. Except you're not supersetting specifically with weights. You're supersetting the heavy lifting with the cycling.
Okay.
And not to say that's going to replace 30 to 40 minute climbs, but it's a way to build that strength. And if we think about how tight our time is, especially during the week, you go to a really effective, beneficial workout in an hour versus getting up at 4:30 to go ride for an hour and a half or 2 hours before work, right? Because we need sleep, we need that recovery. So it's like trying to find how we can primarily use, because the weekends, everyone's out doing their long stuff. And I see it and I'm jealous because I'm like, I don't have a bike with me, right? So it's more like, what can we do during the week to change it up and make it work more for us if we know that our long rides are going to be on the weekend, or we have a race on the weekend or something to that effect.
So you're saying it's totally doable to sort of do an hour a day and then long rides on the weekend, is totally to sort of keep your fitness. Progress.
For
Can
sure.
you progress your fitness that way?
Yes, you can, because one, it's your training history. Like, we all have a long training history if we've been in cycling. If you're just getting into it, you'll have to build more of that aerobic base regardless of what age. But the other thing is, throughout our lives and our exposure to estrogen, we have been able to maximize our fatty acid oxidation, or our ability to use fat, because estrogen spares glycogen and increases fatty acid oxidation. This is why we know fasted training doesn't work for women. We do better fed, because we've already maximized the ability for that adaptation. So as we get older and lose estrogen, we don't have to spend the long, slow distance stuff. It's not beneficial for us. Our muscles have already reached that max oxidation capacity. So now it's maintaining it and also building more muscle integrity, which you do with the higher intense and the more strength type work. So you can build on your fitness specifically, because we lose that top end so easily when we hit that peri and postmenopause. So if you're building that top end, your top end strength, the top end intensity stuff.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. My kid's out there too.
All right, hang on one sec. Did you see the sign?
I know, but Allie has the car and I want to go to work.
Text her, tell her you need it. She's just at Jim's.
Yeah.
Okay. Text her, you tell her you need it. Sorry about that. A little logistical. Two people, one car.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah.
So instead of in our head, we have to put in all these base miles, which is so endemic when we're younger. You got to do 20 hours a week on the bike, right? Build these base miles and then go into your intensity and your sprinting and that kind of stuff. That's not the model that we should be using. We should be looking at maintaining muscle integrity and how do we keep that top end, because that's what we lose so quickly. So do that during the week and then do your long, slow stuff on the weekend.
Gotcha.
If that's how your lifestyle fits.
Right.
You have the ability to do a long ride on a Wednesday or Thursday, then do that and do shorter stuff on the weekend.
Sure.
To fit around family.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about rest and recovery, which again, like fitness and health, are not the same thing, right? Rest is hanging out. Recovery is a little bit more specific as far as what you need to do in order to maximize those adaptations. So probably it would be better for you to explain what the difference between rest and recovery is.
Yeah, so I have to correct a lot of my athletes when they're like, oh, I have a day off.
What? Yeah, I guess so. Sorry.
That's right.
Okay.
Let's say I have to correct a lot of my athletes where a day off is not jamming everything into that day that you haven't been able to do prior to, because that's not recovery. Recovery is when you're very focused and specific on bringing your body back to less inflammation, you're sleeping well, you're actually refilling your muscles with glycogen from a metabolic standpoint. You're not exposing yourself to a lot of sympathetic drive during, so that high stress, that high intensity stuff.
Okay.
So you're really looking at, bringing more of the parasympathetic. So that's 10 or 15 minutes of just chill time where you're not focusing on anything specific. You might be focusing on your breathing or sitting out on the porch and listening to the leaves blow, which sounds a bit hokey, but anything to really activate that parasympathetic calming, which is the counter to how we are all the time. All of that is part of recovery. Rest is when you're not physically doing a training session, right? So you're resting the muscles, but you're not resting and recovering. So like my week this week with traveling all over the place, my quote, rest has been on the plane, but that's not recovery.
Okay. So recovery, so you're saying recovery is as much taking those sort of mindful moments as doing an easy bike ride, that's what I think of as recovery, is like doing an easy bike ride or going for I would never run for recovery, but an easy swim, just some kind of physical activity that is where you're not putting any intensity in.
And this is where you really need to dial it in. And if you are doing an easy ride, you have to cap it. We say, a 50-watt ride where you're just lightly pushing on the pedals, right?
Yeah.
If there's a headwind and you're hitting that 100 watts, you're like, oh, I need to back it down.
Yeah, it's hard to do. Right?
It's really hard to do.
Yeah. I think coaches will always complain that they tell their athletes to do a recovery ride, and it's never easy enough, right?
No, it's not. And when you look at what the pros are doing, they'll have an easy ride and they cap it at 100 watt. They call it the 100-watt ride, or 100 watts or less. And so many amateur athletes, they're like, oh, I'm going out for an easy ride, and they'll bring a friend, but they're pushing that 60-70% zone and they're not recovering.
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel as hard as a quote normal day when they're doing intervals or a group ride.
Right.
That does not mean it's recovery. It doesn't mean it's active recovery.
Yeah, I heard somebody call that zone the no man's land. It's like you're not getting the benefit of the intensity, and you're not getting the benefit of true recovery. It's like you're just adding stress to your.
Yeah, it's the dead zone. I think
the dead zone.
I've heard. Yeah, the dead zone.
Yeah.
Where it's too hard to be easy, yet too easy to be hard.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so one of the things that is hard, maybe Okay. What does it mean? What does adaptation mean for somebody who's active but not training? Is it possible to have adaptations without having a structured training program?
Yeah, I mean, one of the prime examples of that is CrossFit.
Okay.
So when you look at CrossFit, there is some method to the madness, but you're not going to go in and be like, for 3 weeks, we're just focusing on deadlift. You go in and there's total body movement all over the show. And this is part of the reason why, like, the circuit training, the CrossFit, the boot camps, all of those things have become so popular, because it hits strength and high intensity. It's not specifically focused on one thing, but over the course of 2 to 3 months, you get adaptations. You're stronger and your lean mass has come up and your body fat has come down without pure focus. So when we're talking about adaptations and being fit and doing stuff for health, it is the more you change up what you're doing, and you're doing some strength work, you're doing some high intensity stuff, you're going to adapt. You're going to get that top end bit, you're going to get leaner, you're going to get stronger without actually having to have that focus. Which is good across the board, because you're hitting all the metabolic parameters for prevention of those public burden diseases. And you're also hitting all of those feel-good factors of I look better, I'm stronger, all those things that you want without having to be totally focused.
Right. Okay. And what about like high intensity interval training? Does that fit into the same?
Yeah. So what we do know in some of the smaller studies that are coming out on postmenopausal women who have been doing high intensity, so it's not like they rock up from low intensity or sedentary straight in high intensity.
Right.
But the high intensity interval training gives incredible blood sugar control. So, you know, how we become more sensitive to carbohydrate. So if you're doing that high intensity, your insulin sensitivity comes up. Because of that high intensity interval training, you are definitely reducing your risk factor for developing prediabetes or high blood sugar, just by the nature of that high intensity, your body clearing out a lot more of the glycogen. Then your body knows, oh, well, that was a stimulus for clearing out a lot of glycogen. We better refill the muscles. So it becomes one of those exercise adaptations and nutrition adaptations that I was talking about, where it becomes beneficial for health. And it's paramount in the peri and postmenopausal woman to do that high intensity, not only for the lean mass stuff I was talking about, but also for these metabolic parameters that become a worry in the non-athletic, but the fitness orientation of older women.
Okay.
You're like, wait a second, wait a second.
I know, there's so much.
There's so much there. The bottom bullet point is, yes, high intensity interval training, fantastic.
Okay.
Fantastic.
All right.
For health and performance.
Great. But there's one term that you use, and I've heard you use it a lot. It's in ROAR, and I just never really quite understand what it means, which is carb sensitivity. So can you explain that a little bit for like a lay person who?
Yeah. So if you think back to like college days and in our 20s, you eat lots of pizza, beer, whatever, and it doesn't really affect you that much. Like, you can still stay lean, you can sleep well, but as you get older, if you still eat that high, white pasta, white rice, simple carbohydrate diet, you're going to put on body fat, because we become, our body can't handle that amount of glucose at one time.
Okay.
When we get into that peri and postmenopause phase, because estrogen helps with IGF-1, which is insulin growth factor, and some of the ability to stimulate the body to pick up the glucose or spare it from the blood and shove it back in the muscles. When we lose that, we need something that's going to replicate that.
Okay.
Because if you don't, then the carbohydrates that you're used to eating could be whole grain toast and things that didn't used to affect you until you lose the estrogen. All of a sudden, it's going to not do your body any favors. Your resting blood glucose might come up. You might start, really putting on body fat, and you're like, what's going on? It's because you don't have insulin to pull it in as well as you used to when you still had estrogen circulating.
Okay, so this is why the recommendation is to avoid those white carbs like bread and pasta and whatever, and go for vegetables, fruit vegetables, the low glycemic kinds of things.
Yeah, and the like the pulse pastas as well. Like if you really want pasta, then they have lentil and green pea pastas because they're made with bean flours, which are higher in fiber and lower on the glycemic index.
Okay.
So
it's something to look for. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we're coming close to running out of time. So maybe we could talk a little, since we're talking about, we started talking about nutrition. Let's talk about the body composition changes that happen with menopause and what women can do to help with that.
Yeah.
So that's one. It's the avoiding those types of carbs. But what about okay? So what is a lot of carbs? So like, you know, like a 40-30-30 macro ratio. Is that still a lot of carbs?
Yeah, no, that's good for someone who is training, you know, just 5 to 7 days a week, right? So you're using carbs on a regular basis. If you're looking for health, and also know that appetite and needs change daily, depending on what kind of training you're doing. People kind of forget that sometimes. So I'm just putting it out there as a reminder. Yeah. Some days you need more, some days you need less. And the way to really kind of make it easy is, you know what, you have a baseline level of carbohydrate, fat, protein that you need. And we usually try to say, you know, you can stick with that 40-30-30. And it's going to change when you go out for a 3 or 4 hour bike ride. The carbohydrate intake for that day is going to come up well above that 30%. So if you keep that schematic of 30-40-40, or yeah, 30 fat, 30 protein, 40 carbohydrate.
Yeah.
And then it comes up on the days you're doing the long rides. And then on days you're not doing any intensity or long rides, then it comes back down. So that baseline is where you're always trying to aim.
Okay.
And then when you're actually training for something specific, it's that acute recovery time, right? So we say you need protein right after recovery. Now for peri and postmenopause, super critical to get that protein in because it's about the leucine. And we know that 20 grams that's been out there circulating, that this is the dose you need after exercise, is not enough.
Oh, okay.
You need closer to 40.
40?
We finished, yeah.
Okay,
we
wait.
just finished the cut. Yeah.
40. That's new information to me. 40 grams of protein within the first half hour after a real workout. 40.
Yeah.
40.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot.
I know, it is a lot. And and it's because we need exercise and nutrition to stimulate the response for muscle protein synthesis. And that stimulus starts with leucine, but not leucine levels in the muscle, it's leucine levels in the brain. Okay. Estrogen used to stimulate some of the same receptor sites, but now we need more leucine to stimulate those receptor sites to move what we call mTOR, complex 1, to the right place to feed forward into the muscle, to then say, yeah, there's more leucine in the muscle too. Let's really start ramping up that muscle protein synthesis. And it becomes that availability of amino acids. So as postmenopausal women, we tend to have less circulating amino acids, in particular leucine. So that's why that higher protein content is super critical.
Okay. I have no idea what you just said.
That's right.
Hopefully I'm sure there are some people in our audience who that will make complete sense to. But the upshot is that the amount of more protein than I was aware of, and that would be after like a real workout. You know, where you really need to have the extra. I mean, if you just went out for like a very easy short workout, you wouldn't necessarily want to have.
No, you just have your next meal.
Yeah. Okay.
And across the board, as you get older, you need protein both as a man and a woman. But as women, we need more protein. We're looking at that 2.3 grams per kilogram body weight a day. So you're looking every meal hitting about that 40 grams. And then your snacks always have some kind of protein with it.
Yeah. Now, how do you, I mean, that is not doable to me unless you're having a protein drink. Just, you know?
You can supplement with a protein drink, especially after exercise, right?
Yeah.
Because it's really hard. But if you're thinking about what kinds of proteins are out there, I mean, you have your animal proteins where the palm of your hand size piece of chicken is around 22 to 23 grams.
Mm-hmm.
Yogurt, cottage cheese, and then you also have green peas are high in protein.
Yeah. Okay.
Lentils, garbanzo beans, nuts, seeds, mixed grain, sprouted breads. Like there's protein abundant everywhere, but we don't think about that. We think about protein as being, your dairy, your eggs, and your meat. But there's a lot of plant-based stuff out there. So if you were to have like grilled chicken on a leafy green salad that also has beans and nuts and seeds in it, then you're going to hit that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I know some of the people in our audience have used the keto diets and intermittent fasting. So let's spend a little bit of time.
Yeah, for sure.
I want you to go for it.
Talk you through it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we know from the ketogenic diet and from the intermittent fasting stuff comes from the clinical population.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where that fine line between health and performance always gets blurred, because it works really well in the clinical population for dropping weight, having blood sugar control, intermittent fasting showing, increased telomere length, better longevity markers in people who follow intermittent fasting. What they haven't done is they have not layered exercise onto that at all. So when we're looking at the athletic population, the kinds of training that the athletic population does put you in a fast every day, right? Because you're looking at training adaptations, feeding it to recover, and then the next day you're going and you're doing another session. So when you're thinking about intermittent fasting, the idea of like not eating dinner or not eating after dinner and then waiting until breakfast, have breakfast, and that's breaking the fast, you're going to get some benefit from the fasting research if you're doing that. So you have a 9 to 12 hour fast. But if you're looking at doing that and then not eating breakfast before you go out training, as a woman, it's not a great idea at all, because it increases cortisol. It increases all those stress hormones. And then when you have those elevations in stress hormones, it counters everything you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So as I said, we know that women across all ages going into workout fed do so much better on health parameters and adaptations and performance parameters than those who are fasted. From a health scope, for women who are just getting into exercise and are trying to lose weight, still not fasted before your morning session, but then you could have, you do your training fueled and recover from it, and then you can have a longer fast in the afternoon. It's still not fantastic, but if you're looking to lose a lot of body fat quickly in a healthy way, this is a way to do it. Because then, like I said, there's no real evidence to show exercise stacked with fasting is beneficial for women. So what you're doing is you're training really well fueled and recovering from it. So that's one area of research we know works. And then in the afternoon, evening time frame, this is where you can have your window of fasting to garner some of those benefits. But from a practical standpoint, it's better just to do that. Don't eat after dinner. Wake up, have a small snack or breakfast, then do your training.
Gotcha.
When we talk about the ketogenic diet, now this is a whole can of worms.
Okay.
So we know that it is very beneficial for people who have traumatic brain injury, because the brain uses lactate and ketones to recover and heal. So epilepsy, TBI, fantastic.
Okay.
Alzheimer research is coming out and showing that ketogenic is beneficial. But again, all of this is in the clinical population where it originated.
Okay, right.
When we look in the fitness and the athletic population, there's more and more research coming out to show that it is not healthful or beneficial. We know from a performance standpoint, you've heard, you know, I'm going to be more metabolically efficient, I'm going to burn more fat.
Right, yes.
But in women, we've already reached that maximum fatty acid capacity, so ketogenic diet doesn't enhance our fatty acid or our fat burning. And we also know that women need more carbohydrate than men. So if you're trying to follow the ketogenic diet and put in training, it's going to be counter-effective. You're going to get fat, you're going to get tired, you're going to get slow. The research that came out that shows that a ketogenic diet is beneficial to endurance athletes done on men, and it wasn't longitudinal.
Okay.
So if we're looking at, like, you have to understand where that original research came from. And this is what I said, you know, you need the historical context of what's happening. So in the original population, it's fantastic. But when you start getting into female athlete, older female athlete, you want to not follow the trends. You want to reduce the amount of stress that's on your body. From the trendy diets standpoint, like ketogenic, intermittent fasting, fasting mimicking, all of those things, because it's not relevant to you as a postmenopausal woman.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Now we also so you I don't think we mentioned at the beginning of this specifically, but you wrote the book Roar, which a lot of people are familiar with, a lot of women athletes are familiar with, or they should be. And I think you told me that you are working on a new book. Is that something you can talk about?
Sort of. Selena and I are like, I personally would like to update some of the stuff that's in Roar, because we know that it's 4 years old and science changes. It's not to the point where it's defunct. Like, all the information there is great, but some of the small biohacking things I'd like to change.
Okay.
Because we know there's differences in heat adaptation, differences in altitude, and some of the gut microbiome stuff has changed. So that half of the book, I'd like to expand the menopause part. But when you look at what's happening, like, I'm sitting at 46, you know, so I'm getting into that perimenopause, and everything I do is because of me. I'm selfish. But also my friends, people I work with, everyone who's trying to be fit and compete that I'm around, right? We're all in that rising level of masters athletes and what's applicable for us.
Yeah.
So Selena and I are like, okay, well, let's write Roar version 2, like Fast Over 50. Who did that? Was it Dirk?
Yeah, Joe Friel.
Yeah, Joe. So we're looking at doing that for women. So we're currently working on the book for the peri and postmenopausal woman who is maintaining that athletic lifestyle.
I can't wait. And do you have a timeline for that, or is it still in the early stages?
It's in the moderate stages. So, you know, a lot of stuff is coming out. I'm doing research with students as well that we're waiting to get published so we can include in the book.
Gotcha.
Because I don't want to put anything in that's not peer reviewed. So
yay.
Stay tuned.
I will definitely.
Yeah, I want to put out a ebook early. So a couple of the concepts that are finished and the chapters that are done, we want to kind of put out there on the early stages, because there is such a dearth of information out there, and we want to guide women in the right way.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. The lack of information, the lack of really reliable information for menopause is mind-boggling.
I know.
So yeah. Now, if people want to find that, where can you send me a link and I'll include it in this, or how would people? Okay.
The best way really to stay up to date of what everything's going on is just following the social pages, the Dr. Stacy Sims social pages.
Okay.
Because anything I'm doing will come out on those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I'll include those links as well. So,
thanks.
Is there anything that you want to say to perimenopausal women, menopausal women, postmenopausal women that we didn't cover? Anything any last tips or?
It's effing hard. Right?
Yes.
And no one talks about it, just like the period is taboo.
Right.
At least there's conversations about it, even in the news. But when you get to a non-clinical, healthy woman who's going through this, there's almost nothing out there.
Right.
Right. So no, it's temporary blip in your whole lifestyle. And you can look to things like adaptations to help with all the symptoms. Don't go for the automatic hormone replacement therapy. You can if you really, really need it, but don't go on it just because it seems like it's the easy way, because then when it comes to the time to get off it, you might experience those symptoms again. So it's more like use exercise, nutrition, and adaptogens to get through this really hard phase as your body's going through these hormone perturbations. And then as they settle and you've changed your exercise to nutrition, then it's not easy, but it's easier.
Great. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I really appreciate it. I've been a huge fan for a long time, so I'm really appreciative.
Thanks. And thanks for passing the word, too.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
The more we talk about it, the more it gets out there.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
So, yeah, cool. Great. Good luck on your travels coming up, and make sure you get your rest and recovery.
I will. I'm like, okay, get through this week and then rest and recovery next week.
Great. Sounds good.
Cool.
Right. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jen. See ya. Bye.
Bye.